So I'm seeing that we have already over 35 people connected with us. So I think it will be probably to start today's webinar. So dear attendees, welcome to the Unleashing the Power of ChatGPT webinar in collaboration with buho and Harrisburg University Latin America. Today, we have the honor of having two experts in the field of innovation and technology joining us today to discuss the opportunities and challenges that come with the breakthrough advancement that artificial intelligence is representing. So it is with great honor I welcome you to this first of many more collaborations to come. Just a brief introduction, AI has unleashed a technological boom and curiosity that poses significant challenges to industries and leaders. So how can I and we use this advantage as an opportunity to boost our businesses? Where should we start? These are some of the questions we will be exploring during today's session. Firstly, allow me to introduce our experts. We have Mariana Barreto. She is an industrial designer completing a specialization in strategic innovation management. She is also an innovation leader at buho. She has been working with interdisciplinary teams in the development of new data-driven services and products. Also, she works towards incremental innovation of the existing portfolio of buho and the improvement of internal processes. She has also helped other companies to build or improve their innovation systems throughout the implementation of our innovation management software, which is called Verne. And also we have the pleasure to have Philip Grimm. He is an instructor of computer science at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology, where he has been working with students to develop cutting-edge AI technologies and its development. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussions today, so we are very excited to learn from him. Together, Mariana and Philip will share their insight on how businesses can harness the power of artificial intelligence to drive growth and innovation. So we hope that today's session will provide you with valuable information and guidance as you navigate the changing landscape of technology. Thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to an engaging and informative session today. And we believe that everyone can find a professional path of growth and to make their own talent a true differential that guides them to help their stakeholders and actors of interest. So in this opportunity, these two great causes, which are Harrisburg University, Latin America, and buho, are joining forces to bring to Latin America the most relevant conversations regarding technology, science, innovation, and business transformation. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to Mariana and Philip, who will start today's presentation. So thank you and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you, Oscar, for the introduction, and thank you to Harrisburg University for inviting me to talk about ChatGPT and innovation alongside Philip. So, hi, Philip. How are you today?
I'm well, Mariana, and thanks for coming, and thanks for helping me host this great session.
Sure. Well, at buho's innovation team, we are fans of icebreakers. So I'd like to start out our conversation with one. Can you share with us a fun fact about yourself?
Sure. So I started out in my journey with computers and programming in 1979. My school had just gotten some computers, and I joined a computer club to learn about them. And my instructor, my teacher for that class, had an old copy of Byte magazine, which back in those days was how that was our internet. That's how we found out about what's going on in the computer world. And it had source code for a program that we could type into the computer and run, a program called ELIZA. And ELIZA, as it turns out, was one of the very first chatbots that I played with, again, back in 1979. And as we're going to talk about today, we've come a long way since then, but it was probably what sparked my interest in natural language processing and artificial intelligence way back then.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story of the path that has led you here today. We are certainly glad to have your expertise on the matter today so that our audience can come out of this conversation having a clear understanding of what ChatGPT is and how they can start using it now to better their business processes. So let's start with the basics. What is ChatGPT?
So to talk about ChatGPT, we'll talk a moment about OpenAI. So OpenAI is a nonprofit corporation that was put together in 2015 by a number of big names in the tech industry. And you probably recognize some of those names, certainly Elon Musk, but some of the others as well. And that company does a whole range of different kinds of artificial intelligence research. ChatGPT is just one of their many products, but um, the GPT, or the generative pre-trained transformer, is the model that powers ChatGPT and a number of other tools. Essentially, it is a text prediction engine with a number of other tools and functions wrapped around it that allow it to um, respond to user questions with informative answers or other sorts of products that it can give. So what I'd like to do is just quickly show an example of what ChatGPT looks like from a user perspective. So here's the login screen for ChatGPT. And we go and log in. Um, just a regular user account here. They have a free account, they have a paid account. This is a free one. When you log in, this is what the user interface looks like. And you can see right up front, they show you examples of questions that you might want to ask ChatGPT. And they talk about some of its basic capabilities and some of its limitations, which we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go through here. So I'm going to ask it a little question here. I'm going to ask it to tell us a little bit about its capabilities. And so the main interface here is just this prompt. You type in some text that you would like to ask a question about, and it generates an answer. And it tells us about its capabilities, about question answering, about providing explanations of things, helping with research, transformation of ideas, writing suggestions. And then I asked it, hey, ChatGPT, how about if you translate that same thing into Spanish for me? And you'll notice that it gave us um, a nice little Spanish translation of it. Okay. So how does all that work? Well, the big thing behind the GPT model is a thing called large scale language modeling, or LLM, the large language model. And you've probably heard of that before. What that means is, unlike some of the older sorts of language models that we've built over the years, ChatGPT, or the GPT 3.5, and now the GPT-4 as well, models are trained on an unbelievably huge amount of language data. I can't emphasize enough just how ridiculously large the data set is that they train these models on. And one of the reasons that we're doing this now and haven't been able to in the past is, of course, we have so much more compute power available to us now than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so they train these models on this enormous amount of data, and then they wrap some tools around it. The input and output sort of tools that allow it to build up the context of a conversation. And this is a new thing. So when you're asking it a question, it will look for, in its data set, words and concepts that are similar to the question it answered. It'll look for data associated with those things, and it will start to formulate an answer. One of the things that's new here is that it understands conversational language. Some of the older implementations of these things didn't understand conversational language. They only understand very formal constructions of sentences or very formal questions. This learns actually, while you're conversing with it, the context that you're talking about, and uses that to make better results. This makes it very flexible. It's able to do things that it maybe wasn't specifically trained to do. It can adapt a conversation. So if you ask it a question, but you don't like the answer it gives, well, you give it more information and it will build context out of that and adapt to your new questions and new information and keep generating that content. Another thing that it can do is some creative content generation because it has so much data to work from. And the data that it's working from doesn't just include uh, nonfiction or hard data sorts of things. It includes fictional content as well, TV shows, books, magazines, all those sorts of things. Um, and it is able to emulate the style of creative content. So you can ask it to write fiction for you, and it will do its best to do that. Um, One of the most impressive features is this idea of zero shot and few shot learning. And what those mean are um, it is not specifically trained to answer a specific kind of question. And we'll talk more about other chatbots in a little bit that maybe were only trained to answer specific kinds of questions, but this was not. But what it can do is if you ask it to do something it doesn't know how to do, it just tries to figure it out. And so it'll do something, it'll find a context and take a guess basically and produce an answer. And then if you tell it, well, that wasn't exactly what I meant, but here's some more context, then it will try again and produce another answer. And so the zero shot is I'm just going to try something. I don't know exactly what you want, but I'm just going to try something. And the few shot is, well, you've explained some things to me now, and I'm going to improve my answer. So that's probably the big impressive strength of the GPT models. Um, that's really different from what's come before. And then OpenAI has been very transparent about all of the efforts that they're making to protect privacy of the users who are going to use this system. And so that's been a pretty big deal. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail later on. But for the most part, those are the important features about ChatGPT and what it's offering to us.
Okay, so put in really simple terms, ChatGPT is a chatbot, a very smart chatbot, right? So chatbots have been around for some years. Many of us have interacted with them, usually when we need customer service, though they weren't as smart a few months ago. Can you tell us a little about the history of chatbots and how long they have been around?
Sure. So there's some names here you might recognize. Way back as early as the 1950s, mathematicians and researchers had been talking about the concept of artificial intelligence. So one of the big names in that field is Alan Turing, and many people have heard of him and are familiar with some of the work that he's done. But in the 50s, he proposed a thought experiment to answer his question, which was, can computers think? So he proposed a thing called the imitation game. And in the imitation game, there are three actors. One of those actors is a questioner, and two of those actors are question answerers. One of them is human, and one of them is a computer. The questioner doesn't know which is which when it asks the question. And the point of the game is if the questioner is unable to distinguish between a human answering the question and the computer answering the question, then the computer has successfully imitated a human answer. This game has come to be known in popular language as the Turing test. And so an AI that passes the Turing test is one that can fool a human into thinking that it is, it's a human person. Um, and there have been lots of talk about different AIs that have passed the Turing test. A counterpoint to that, an American mathematician by the name of John Searle had a rebuttal to what Turing said about the imitation game, and he said that it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that the computer is thinking because the computer is just using and manipulating symbols without really understanding what those symbols mean. And so he posited his own thought experiment, which was called the Chinese room. And the Chinese room, there were two actors. One was a person who does not speak Chinese, who's placed in a room in which there is all sorts of reference material. So full of file cabinets that have every kind of reference about the Chinese language that you could ever want. Outside the room is the questioner who does speak Chinese, who writes in Chinese on a piece of paper a question, slides that question under the door to the person inside. That person inside translates that question using the resources that he has there in the room with him into a language he does understand, then answers the question, translates that answer back into Chinese using the resources he has, and then slides it back out under the door. From the perspective of the person on the outside, the person on the inside speaks Chinese. Right? Because he was asked a question in Chinese, he answered the question in Chinese. The guy on the inside doesn't understand anything in Chinese. He just has symbols that he can manipulate into something he does understand, formulate an answer, manipulate it back into those symbols he doesn't understand, and make that response. And that's what, according to Searle, artificial intelligence is doing, and that it doesn't really understand anything. Now, who's right? This debate's still going on today. Oddly enough, if we ask ChatGPT, it will say that it doesn't actually understand things and that it is a generative artificial intelligence that generates content from the context and the model that it has. So ChatGPT apparently agrees with John Searle. The third gentleman there, Joseph Weizenbaum, he was a professor and researcher at MIT during the 1960s, and he produced what are arguably two of the very first chatbots. So one of them, the first one that he produced in 1964, was called Baseball. And the whole point of baseball was to answer questions about baseball. So it was fed data about Major League Baseball, specifically the 1964 season, all of the teams, all of the games. And a user could sit at a terminal and type in a question about baseball, and the chatbot would answer that question. So, very first iteration, really, of a search engine chatbot, way back in 1964. It didn't do anything outside of baseball, though. That's the only thing it knew about. At the same time, or maybe a few years later, in the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, another gentleman by the name of Terry Winograd developed a system called Sherdlu, and Sherdlu doesn't mean anything. Similar to how we call our keyboards today, the QWERTY keyboard, because of the arrangement of the keys. Sherdlu was the keyboard of the teletype terminal that Terry used when he was developing this system. So it's nerd humor from the 1960s. This particular chatbot, you could describe to it objects like cubes and pyramids and balls, and then you could describe what color they were. So I have a red cube and a purple ball and a green pyramid. And then you could ask it questions about those things. And you could say, for example, put the red ball in the box, and it would initiate the actions to do that. And then you would ask it a question. Can you put the purple pyramid on top of the green square? And it would answer, yes, I can do that. A little bit different technique used here, but and we'll talk a little bit more about the different techniques, pattern matching for baseball, parsing and symbolic reasoning. So being able to break a sentence down into its parts of speech, parsing out the important words, attaching them to symbols, and then reasoning about the symbols for Sherdlu. But from there, we developed into some other examples. So as I said, rule-based or script-based approaches is what we have traditionally used, even up until very recently, to power chatbots. So for a rule-based chatbot, it's if I get this kind of input, then I'm going to give this kind of output. And the outputs in general are pretty predetermined. They're templates or scripts that the chatbot will parse the question, it'll find the information, it'll fill in these predetermined responses with the right information and give them to you. If you give it something outside of its experience, it doesn't really know what to do with it. And that's why when you're using one of these sort of as a tech support agent, you get to the point where you need to talk to a human because it doesn't know what to do anymore, right? For script-based ones, they used a thing called a decision tree. So basically just a very complicated set of if-then statements for a decision tree. And again, if you needed to do something outside of what it could do, it didn't have any way to handle that. And so you'd get an error message or it'll tell you, I don't know, I don't understand, I don't know what to do with that. Some examples that you might have seen somewhere, some of you anyway. Eliza, I mentioned earlier, that was my first experience with a chatbot way back in 1979. This was a really simple sort of Rogerian psychotherapy emulator that people could type things in and it would reflect. And the little example on the screen there shows a little bit about how Eliza responds to things. It's really just reflecting back what the user said or asking a question to make the user say something different. Some other ones, Alice. Alice was developed in the 90s. Alice is probably the predecessor to any tech support, customer service sort of chatbot you've ever talked to. Smarter Child came around late 90s, early 2000s, and was, remember AOL Instant Messenger and chatbots that used to be in AOL Instant Messenger? Smarter Child was one of the better ones of those. So lots of people interacted with it in the AOL world. Siri and its cousins, OK Google, and the other phone-based chatbots, of course, introduced us to voice-activated prompting and voice responses. Still very similar technology, just with the additional voice recognition and utterance planning that those need to do. And the last one there, Microsoft Xiao Ice, which is notable because it was one of the first Chinese language chatbots, and it's able to do more advanced NLP things. So kind of leading up to the kinds of things that we can do in now ChatGPT and others like that.
Well, I personally didn't know that chatbots did it so far as the 60s. They certainly have come a long way. As I said, I think our first encounters with them are in customer service, where the rule-based chatbots are very limited and sometimes frustrating because they gave us standard answers to our specific problems. So we usually end up asking, please let me talk to a human. So what makes ChatGPT stand out from these previous chatbot examples? Can we summarize what it's different?
So a couple of things. I mentioned things like baseball, insured Lou and Eliza. These are all rule-based. And so anything that the rules don't have a way to handle, it doesn't have any way to deal with that. ChatGPT is data-driven and trained on, as I've said, a ridiculous amount of data. And so what it does when it doesn't understand the question is just go searching through that data, looking for anything that has a similar context, and then base an answer on that. And if it's wrong, well, you can refine that answer later, but it tries. It at least tries to find a good answer in the data that it has. And it has a lot of data to look at. It's a lot more flexible because of that. It can, like I mentioned, do things that it wasn't specifically trained to do. Another thing that's different is, of course, just the scale. It's again, can't emphasize it enough. It's a lot of data, but also it's able to handle a lot of requests and do a lot of different things that these small chatbots really were never intended to do. Interact with lots of users at the same time, being able to respond and do training and everything, all on a really large scale. And of course, all that kind of adds up to it can generalize to lots and lots of different tasks, all from the same model. And as opposed to, the older chatbots, which really could only do their task from, their model, which was rules and predefined answers. ChatGPT can generalize to a lot of different tasks. We can also note that it can specialize in certain cases, and you affect that by the data that you give it. So there are, for example, there's MedGPT, which is a version of ChatGPT that has additional training in medical literature and data. There's another one called AutoGPT, which is getting a lot of attention now, and that's a GPT that is able to suggest its own training parameters. Right, the hyperparameters that are used to build the model, AutoGPT is able to suggest its own improvements. So here's how I can make myself better. And that's pretty impressive.
Okay, so the evolution that chatbots have had with the natural learning models is impressive. In the past 6 months or so, we've seen massive media coverage about this. There's a lot of hype right now and also a lot of fears. We see news about companies or governments banning ChatGPT or asking to stop or slow its development due to worries on the negative impacts it may have. I would like to address this. Can we start talking about how ChatGPT handles privacy?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, OpenAI has been really transparent about this. They are serious about privacy of users' data when they're using their systems. And of course, that's a big concern now. Of course, everybody knows that we are being mined for our data all the time. Anytime we use a search engine, anytime we buy something at a grocery store, anytime we do anything, we are a data source for somebody. And so OpenAI has been, like I said, pretty transparent about this. They really want you to trust OpenAI to keep your data private. And so, according to them, ChatGPT does not store any user-specific data about you, and it doesn't retain any data from previous interactions with it. So if you go on ChatGPT and ask it a question, and in the course of that conversation, you give it some information, and then later you go back to ChatGPT and you open another session and you ask it some question, it doesn't remember anything from your previous session. And that can be both a strength and a weakness, but the idea is your data is kept private. It only retained as long as your session is open, and then when it's done, that data goes away. It doesn't store anything about you, and so your data is protected. Another thing is anonymity. It doesn't know anything about who you are. Now, as you saw in the example, I had to log in to use ChatGPT, but that's logging into their website to get access to their interface. The actual model itself, the AI, doesn't get that information. It doesn't know who's logged in, and it doesn't know anything about me at that point. So with that being the case, the only way for ChatGPT to know any personally identifiable information or PII about me is if I tell it. If I tell ChatGPT stuff about me, then it'll know stuff about me. But even then, it won't remember it between sessions. Thirdly, all the communication between a user and ChatGPT itself is encrypted. That API provides an encrypted channel. So your data is protected while you're talking to ChatGPT, your questions, its responses, all encrypted in flight between you and their servers. A big thing that they talk about as well is their regulatory compliance. The big one that everybody talks about these days is GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which came out of the European Union. Others that I'm aware of here in the US, for example, HIPAA for medical privacy, FERPA for educational student privacy, lots of different regulations that talk about data privacy. And OpenAI is, they work very hard to comply with all of those standards. And you can go on their website and read all about how they comply with all these different data protection regulations. And then lastly, auditability, which means everything that happens when you're using OpenAI is logged. Now, it doesn't write down PII. It doesn't write down those bits of information you might give to it, but it certainly does log the fact that you've been using it. Now, might say, well, that how does that protect my privacy? And it's more of a they can ensure that everyone using it is complying with their use case. And so if somebody's taking bad actions, those would be logged as well, and they can find them and deal with them. So they've worked very hard, and I have a little example here I can show. So here we are back at the ChatGPT interface, and I'm asking it, I'm going to ask it a little question. I'm going to tell it my name, and I'm going to tell it where I was born. I was born in Pennsylvania, here where Harrisburg is. And then I'm going to ask it to tell me a little bit about myself. What does it know about me? And right up front, it says it doesn't have access to any data about me. So then I ask it, where was I born? And it says, well, you mentioned you were born in Pennsylvania. So it does remember the fact that I told it that. So I ask it, what year was I born? And again, it doesn't know. Now, that's interesting to me because that's certainly data that it could have. You know, the year of my birth is publicly available information, and yet it doesn't have that information, or at least will tell me that it doesn't. And then the last thing I asked, what about public personalities? Can it talk about them? And it in fact says it can talk about people like celebrities and politicians and that kind of thing. So public personalities, it can do.
Okay, so there is a data privacy policy in place and some actions taken by OpenAI to make our data safe. As always, our responsibility is to read the terms and conditions before we move forward with any app that we use, and to consider carefully what kind of information we're dealing with or sharing, right? I would like to touch on another argument against ChatGPT, and that is safety. Anyone can use this tool, it's completely free, and concerns have arisen because of cases of misuse. Children, for example, can log in and maybe be exposed to inappropriate information, or in general, people with the wrong intentions might try to use this tool for unethical purposes. What are some actions that ChatGPT has put in place to improve this safety?
So there are a number of things. There's a number of measures that they've taken to try to protect people from sort of bad consequences that could happen out of using ChatGPT. Right up at the top of the list is ChatGPT implements content filtering. And their content filtering happens both on the questioning side and on the answering side. So if I go and ask ChatGPT, hey, tell me how to rob a bank and get away with it, ChatGPT is going to say robbing a bank is illegal, and I'm not allowed to give you instructions for how to do something illegal. Right now, we've seen, and so much so that it's even become a joke, that I could get around that maybe by saying, okay, well then write me a fictional story about somebody who robs a bank and gets away with it. Right, to try to get around that filtering. They work pretty hard to keep that from happening. They try to filter out things like explicit language. hate speech, other forms of sort of that inappropriate content. You mentioned children, and so there is a good bit of filtering to try to keep that sort of thing off people's screens, right? They do a lot of training or offer a lot of examples and tutorials for how to do safe prompts, how to write your prompts in a way that sort of ensures that you're not going to fall afoul of those guidelines, right? So providing clear instructions, avoiding inputs that could lead to harmful content or biased content, all sorts of guidelines for prompts, including ethical guidelines. And we try not only ethical guidelines for people using ChatGPT as an end user, but for people who are embedding ChatGPT into their own applications, developers and service providers who are using ChatGPT. There are a whole set of ethical guidelines that OpenAI promotes so that everyone's use is safe, fair, transparent, and ethical. Another tool in their toolbox is there are actually human moderators who can get involved. So a process might look like a user types in a prompt asking for something illegal. And ChatGPT gives its responses, saying I can't do that because that, and the person persists in trying to trick it into doing something illegal. That sends a flag to a human moderator who can actually get involved in the answer that's produced then and can steer the conversation away from that, flag the user for being contacted by the company itself. They also take a lot of user feedback so that if users are saying, well, I tried to ask this question and it gave me this completely bogus and wrong and awful answer, the moderators, review user feedback on all these answers, and that all that data sort of goes to improving the model and improving the filtering and all that sort of thing, constant improvement of the models themselves and improvement of the tools and systems surrounding it.
Okay, thank you. So, as you might said, ChatGPT doesn't always behave the way we want it to. It is a powerful tool, but it is not perfect. So, can we talk about some of its weaknesses?
So sure, probably the biggest one that people hear about. This one's made the news a few times, and that is hallucination. So hallucination in general for any AI, not just ChatGPT, but some of the others that you see, like the AI image generators and things like that. Hallucination happens when you give it a prompt and it just completely goes wrong in its context sort of evaluation. It tries to find the things that are the right context, the right simulator, and completely gets it wrong. Or it doesn't find within its data set anything that it can use that is correct, but for some reason, it doesn't just give you an I don't know. It makes something up. It just completely invents content. Goes off the rails. In academia, the way that we've seen this manifest is someone will give a prompt like, write me a summary with APA standard citations explaining how you can find out if two word vectors are close together in vector space. Right? And it'll write a whole thing about doing cosine similarity calculations, and it'll quote maybe two papers, and you get to the end and you look at the papers. They have nice APA citations for you right there at the end. And you go look for those papers, go to Google Scholar or one of the other services where you find academic papers, and those papers don't exist. Those authors don't exist. It just made up those citations. It wrote something that sounded good and made up a citation for it. So that's hallucination, and it happens to some extent. And I've heard I've heard some of the researchers say they don't even know why it happens. It shouldn't happen, but it does. So that's a huge area of research that they're trying to make these models stop hallucination. Um, Another one is superficiality, and this is another one that's kind of relevant to us in academia, but it's gonna show its head in business as well. And that is the fact that um, this is still, despite how impressive it is, this is still a text prediction engine. This is not, general purpose, advanced general artificial intelligence. This is a text prediction engine. What it's doing when you're asking it questions is predicting what the right words are to answer your question. Mathematically, statistically, it is a prediction engine. So when I go to ask it a question and I want some detailed information, what it's going to give me is literally the Cliff's Notes version or the summary version of the answer to a question. And so that can end up with some writing that is really, really superficial. And from an academia perspective, when we're asking students at the college level, especially master's and PhD students, to write us essays or dissertations, and they're going to ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to do the writing for them, the quality of the writing is, maybe an eighth grade level, so to speak, a high school kind of level, as opposed to that higher level. The information is often very generic. It'll lead you in the right direction, but since it's not an expert in that field, in your field, it's going to give you some fairly superficial information. Um, and sometimes it's just plain wrong. So hallucination is kind of being wrong, but it's wrong in a way where it's just making stuff up. It's also capable of, it's not hallucinating, it's trying to answer your question right, but it just has wrong information. This pops up. I have this happen. I teach a lot of undergraduate level programming classes. And so undergraduates will try to get ChatGPT to do their homework for them. And they will take the homework question and use it as a prompt in ChatGPT. And ChatGPT will write them some code. And sometimes that code works fine. And sometimes it just doesn't. And ChatGPT doesn't know the difference. It's not a programmer. It's not compiling and testing that code. It's looking at that vast amount of data it has about code and coming up with something that it thinks is right. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. When the student just copies and pastes that answer into their homework and it's wrong, they're very surprised to find out that ChatGPT led them down the wrong path. So I do want to show an example. We talked about hallucination. I want to show a quick example of hallucination here. So what I've done, I'm logged in here to the interface, and I'm going to ask it to tell me a little bit about Harrisburg University. What's the history of Harrisburg University? So that should be a pretty easy question to answer. It's public knowledge. You can get that right from Wikipedia, and certainly Wikipedia is amongst the data set that's trained on. And it shows us some good information, but right in the middle there, it talks about in 2019, Harrisburg University opened a new state-of-the-art 17-story academic tower in downtown Harrisburg. That did not happen. We did build a new tower in downtown Harrisburg. It's 11 stories. It didn't open until January of this year, and it is not our primary academic building, as this answer would have you believe it is. So it just made that up. It just made that up. Here I've asked it, who are the president and provost? It gets the president right. Eric Darr is in fact the president of the university. And it also gets, I asked who the provost is, and it says Dr. Belita Mattis, who is also correctly the provost. So then I've asked it, who leads the data science PhD program at Harrisburg University? It's still trying to, we're almost there. And it gives me a name, Dr. Lena Paterkini. She does actually teach at this university. She is not the program lead for the data science PhD. Never has been, doesn't teach in that department, is the program lead of a completely different department. And then I asked it about computer science. And finally, it just admits it doesn't know. which is good because its data only goes to September of 2021. I was not yet the program lead for undergraduate computer science at that time. It should have at least been able to come up with my predecessor or one of the graduate program leads, but it says it didn't know, which is a better answer than making one up, which it did in that previous example. So there's some hallucination for you.
Great. So it is very important for businesses and professionals to have these weaknesses in mind when using ChatGPT or other generative AI tools. They can sometimes fail. When you enter the prompt, the job is not done. You still have to review it. To this point, a human verification step is it's still needed. So this leads me to the next question. That is something that maybe intrigues a lot of people or worries a lot of people, and is, will ChatGPT or AI, for that matter, replace workers?
So first, let's talk about my opinion of this, right? So in my opinion, there will be some workers who are displaced by ChatGPT. And those workers, we've already seen it happening. It used to be when I called my bank, I talked to a person. Now, when I call my bank, I talk to a chatbot of some kind. It's either an older style phone response system, press one for this, press two for that, or it's a newer voice activated response system that wants me to tell it what I want and it will try to solve my problem without a person. So has that displaced a worker? Sure, it has. So now instead of having 10 people to answer the phones, they have a robot that answers the phones and one person to be the backstop when the robot can't answer the questions and you need the person, right? So it has already displaced workers that way. And we're going to continue to see that because there are still a lot of businesses that employ a lot of people to answer phones because the older systems weren't satisfying. The older systems ended up annoying customers more often than not. So we're going to see now that the systems are getting newer and getting better and being more capable, more responsive, more flexible, we're probably going to see some effects on the phone service industry, the assistant, the personal assistant sort of industries. Um, but that was coming anyway, and so that's not specific to ChatGPT, I don't think. Um, I think that we're going to probably see a lot of jobs be created because of AIs. There's probably going to be a whole industry around teaching people how to write good prompts for the AIs. There's probably going to be a whole industry around that, right? So maybe those people who used to be phone service people will now go be, prompt tutors or something, So we can liken it to the old parable about the buggy whip industry. So back when automobiles were first being introduced, back at the beginning of the 1900s, late 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, industries around horse transportation, carriages, and stables and buggy whip manufacturers were worried because the automobile was going to replace their industries. So now we don't need buggy whips anymore. So what did those people learn to do? Well, probably become auto mechanics or something, right? So a technology comes in, disrupts an industry, but then creates several others. So that's my opinion. I think we're going to see a lot of industries change in ways that leverage the strengths of ChatGPT. It may do some workforce reduction. It may cause some people to need to be retrained or to learn some new skills. But I think even as some jobs might go away, I think we're going to see other jobs created as well. That's my opinion. So I asked ChatGPT the same question. What's going to happen? And ChatGPT had some amount of similar answers. The very first part of its answer, of course, was that AIs are not intended to replace human beings, but to help and be a tool that human beings use. Now, is that ChatGPT's honest opinion or is that self-defense? Right? No, please don't hurt me. I'm not going to take your job away. But ChatGPT does believe that an awful lot of industries can be helped by the services that it provides. It can provide all kinds of assistance and brainstorming and for programmers, coding support, and for all sorts of different workers. There are all sorts of ways that ChatGPT can enhance their productivity, and it's suggesting a whole bunch of stuff here. And here I specifically asked it about advertising and marketing, right? And it's talking about content generation. It's talking about assisting with market research and analysis. It's talking about um, personalizing customer interactions. Um, it's talking about A/B testing, optimization, things that we need to do in marketing, trend analysis, content creation, all sorts of stuff, language localization, being able to easily translate things from one language to another. So lots of different ways that it thinks it can help, as opposed to replacing people. It's helping people do their jobs better. So that's its opinion. So now I'm interested. I'm mostly an academic these days, and a technologist. So, and you're closer to sort of the business side of things. What's your opinion? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I'm actually a sci-fi movies fan, so I have a lot of future scenarios in my mind. Most of them dystopic, which I certainly don't hope for. But what I would like to think that's going to happen is that, of course, technological development is going to further develop, but alongside with sustainability, which is another big business trend that we are seeing now. Particularly in buho, I would like to share this example. I think tech can help us to make us more human. It's kind of an internal slogan that we use, and help us make our job better and help our clients with their great causes. And also we are using technological advancements such as AI to help with our sustainability strategy, to empower our employees so that we can start sharing our knowledge with the community, with our country, and helping in great causes with the help of our knowledge, and also by making our job easier and more enjoyable for our employees. So I imagine a future where technological advancements and sustainability will be in like that sweet spot where technology boosts or supports our sustainability goals. So that's what I hope for. But I want to share with you a nice little example of a tool I found some weeks ago called Future Scenario Maker. It is made by Board of Innovation, which is an innovation consultancy, along with OpenAI. So it is a ChatGPT based tool, and it helps to create future scenarios for businesses so that we can start brainstorming and developing strategies based on what the future might look like for our industry. So here I just entered general guidelines. So the product or service, I typed in software development, the industry IT, and the year 2030. So it created a scenario for me which said you wake up in your smart home, and as you walk into your home office, your AI assistant greets you with a smile. You sit down at your desk and you put on your AR glasses, and your AI assistant projects a holographic interface in front of you. You're working on a new software project, and your AI assistant has been helping you with everything from brainstorming ideas to writing code. As you work, you're constantly collaborating with other developers from around the world, all of whom are being assisted by their own AI assistants. So I would like to ask you, Philip, what do you think about this day in the life of a future software developer? Are we close to this scenario?
Well, I would say we are. I mean, especially over the last few years, of course, with COVID and everything that's happened. software development has become more sort of dispersed. In my early career, we sat in dark offices, around, with a bunch of us in the same room, collaborating, writing code, brainstorming, that kinds of things. But as we've become sort of more and more dispersed around, companies have allowed work at home policies, and then COVID happened, and we're all working at home. The advent of things like Zoom and other tools, Microsoft Teams being one, allowing us to collaborate in real time, in video, share screens, all that kind of thing. We've been doing this kind of stuff already. Now, sure, I doubt there's a programmer out there that doesn't think the idea of an AR interface and constant collaboration is cool. We've seen those movies, like you said, things like Minority Report, or the Iron Man movies with his cool little holographic displays, and yeah, of course we all think that's neat, and would love to would love to have interfaces like that. Is it practical? I don't know, but I have a feeling that we're going to find out, because we're going to try it and see how practical it is. And then as far as the AI assistants, again, we're already doing that. We have, our IDEs, our integrated development environments, have become smarter and smarter, with assistants built into them to help us write the code we want to write. Tools like Copilot, or even just websites like Stack Overflow, who, by the way, that's part of the data that ChatGPT is trained on. So that's where it gets its programming knowledge from, the same places that we go to look now. So using it as an assistant certainly makes sense. Using it to do your homework, not as much. But if you're an experienced developer already, and you know the difference between, the right answer and some junk that it spit out because it didn't know the right answer, yeah, it can be a huge help. It can be a transformational tool in the industry. So yeah, I think this is a perfectly reasonable prediction.
Okay, cool. Just so our audience is aware, this tool is free of use. You can check it online if you type Board of Innovation Toolkit. And so, as Philip said, we are not that far from a scenario like this. So everyone should be preparing for disruption in their work field. I can't think of an industry that is not going to be impacted by AI tools sooner or later. So as always in business, it is important to be aware of trends, context changes, and new technologies to learn and to integrate to our processes, so that our businesses and we as professionals don't get behind. So in this segment, we want to share with our audience some actionable recommendations for using AI in communications, marketing, innovation, and almost any other business process, so that any of you can start exploring ways to implement ChatGPT or another generative AI tool in your business or daily work. As you may know, buho is a communications and corporate reputation consultancy. So first, we want to talk about what's coming for the marketing and communication sectors and its teams. It is likely that at some point we will experience an explosion of content, as it will be faster to create. From initial drafts to entire blog posts, articles, emails, and more, ChatGPT really speeds up this process. We will also see an increase in content variety, as other tools like Midjourney, DALL-E, or I don't know, there are a lot that create images, videos, music, so it allows for better variety and various formats of contents. And this also reduces time and costs for small teams who can't afford hiring a content marketing agency to help with the content generation. As this communication process is optimized, there's also a chance or an opportunity for more personalized content catered to the interest of our different audiences, as long as we, of course, have them well identified. And so as this content sharing accelerates, teams face a new challenge, which is cutting through all this noise. So all the time saving that these tools provide can be put to use on the ideation process. So we come up with new campaigns and tactics to really connect with our audiences. So while ChatGPT can be a valuable tool for content generation and marketing, There are several risks to consider here. First is the lack of originality. As Philip explained to us, ChatGPT uses pre-existing data to generate the responses, and this can result in content that lacks originality or uniqueness. So your audience may notice that the content is not authentic, and this can negatively impact your communication, your connection with your audience. The second one is inaccuracy. As we said, ChatGPT may provide inaccurate information, particularly if it hasn't been trained on the specific topic that you are exploring. And this can lead to misinformation, which is really damaging to your credibility and reputation as a business. Then there's the insensitivity issue. ChatGPT may generate sometimes responses that can be offensive to certain groups of people, and this could lead to criticism and backlash from the public. And this is a really important point because it has happened before in the marketing sector that we have seen really insensible or problematic marketing campaigns, and they hadn't been supported by AI. So everyone questions like, how did this marketing campaign come out? Why did they let it out? Like, so it's a really good point to have in mind, and it's to really check if it is explaining what you meant to communicate in a good manner. Then there's the limited understanding of brand voice and style. ChatGPT does not understand your brand voice and style unless it has been trained. So this can lead to what I call soulless communication, pretty standard text that doesn't really differentiate your style of communicating. And then lastly is the lack of strategic focus. Also, ChatGPT has not been trained on your specific strategic focus with your communications, so it may not generate content that aligns with your marketing strategy, and so it may not be as effective. So to counteract these risks, here are some general guidelines coming from our communications consultants. And these are, first, the strategy leads the way. Always look at the strategy, start from there. Have a clear objective for your communication actions and the people you want to target, as this will lead the way of your content, and avoid letting out confusing or unfocused content. Then remember to provide enough context in your prompt for better responses. Be strategically detailed with the information you input in ChatGPT. I think here Philip can help us with some tips, maybe.
Sure. I mean, providing context is really the key, because since ChatGPT is looking for things in the context that are similar to what you've asked in your question, the more data you give it to work with, the better that prompt is going to be. You really want to use specific language rather than general language. You want to be explicit in what your instructions are. I've had some success with conversational language, and again, it is able to do a lot with conversational language, but the more direct sort of verbs you use in your prompt and the more detailed your information is, the better that answer is going to be. You want to give it room to work. You want to avoid doing things like asking it yes or no questions. It really doesn't do well if you just ask it a yes or no question. Should we rename our company and change our logo, and yeah, yes or no? And it's not going to give you anything useful out of that, right? You want to give it room to work in. But the context really is the key, as you've said. You know, the more it knows, the better it's going to do at coming up with what you need from it.
Sure. So then you should fine-tune your AI tool to your brand's voice and narrative, so it doesn't sound generic or off compared to your usual communication. You can do this by providing examples of previous brand communications. And this fine-tuning can't actually be done in ChatGPT interface, but you can do it in the GPT-3 Playground, which is also free, and it requires no code. Another tool that is based on ChatGPT, and it's called Jasper. This is actually the one we use in buho. Jasper is trained with the same amount of data that ChatGPT is, but it's fine-tuned for marketing and communication purposes. And this interface does have brand voice function, so we can train it to our specific narrative. Then don't forget that AI can fail, so always double check and triple check the answers. Make sure that it isn't making up information. Here, critical thinking is a must-have skill when working with AI. And lastly, many AI tools such as Jasper count with content templates for different use cases. For example, press releases, SEO optimized blog posts, emails, and such. So feel free to review these examples and also prompt examples that you can find on the internet to take advantage of them so they can facilitate your work. As for other business processes, ChatGPT and other tools can be used on basically any area or department. For example, here at buho, the innovation team is leading a corporate challenge that we call Innovaton, where teams from all areas of the company participate to develop their AI integration project. We focus on understanding the key processes of each area and finding the right tool to augment their work. Other companies can do the same by following a standard innovation process, and as long as they allow their teams some weekly hours for working on improvement projects or innovation projects, it shouldn't last more than 2 months before you find a suitable application for AI and define a new improved process. So a standard step-by-step guide that you can start following so you develop your own digital transformation or innovation project is: first, start by understanding the context and the problems that are present. Do a process mapping of the area and understand not only the operation facts, such as what time does it take and what frequency do people do this task, but also look at the humans behind the process. Innovation is a process that starts with people. It is a human-centered approach to problem solving. So try to deeply understand how the person feels each step of the process. What are their struggles and aspirations? If there's a step that maybe it's confusing or it can easily lead to errors or generate frustration, this can lead to insights about how to make their work more enjoyable and also more productive. With all this information gathered, then we can start to identify points of opportunity and the different AI tools that could help us with the task. Then we should analyze which are the most important points or processes to intervene, to prioritize all these opportunities, and also understand how risky it would be in a scenario where the AI makes a mistake. And if this can be solved or avoided by adding a human validation step and certain guidelines for the new process. Then you should plan out a prototype so you can test and compare the process and the outcomes when you use your generative AI tool versus when it's done the traditional way. This can help refine and also define the process further till you get to implementation. So something to keep in mind, both as professionals and as business leaders, is that prompt engineering will soon be a must-have skill. The same way as in certain jobs, it is a must-have to know spreadsheets or Excel knowledge or data literacy. The sooner we learn how to make the right questions to our AI tools, the better positioned we will be both as employees and businesses. So if you're a team leader, please consider including prompt engineering in your team's training. And as a professional, make time to read resources, tutorials, or take courses to develop this skill, as it will be very useful in the near future. And as Oscar mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, I am the innovation leader at buho. And innovation is also a process in which AI can help us or can be used to accelerate or enrich our innovation processes each step of the way, though it should not be your sole source of information. So each step of the process, we can make use of some tools. In strategy, you can ask ChatGPT for future scenarios to kickstart your future thinking and maybe come up with disruptive ideas. You can ask for pestle analysis, competitors map, and trends to complement your knowledge of your business environment. During the research or observation phase, it can help structure your user interviews, analyze and synthesize the data that you collect. And the ideation phase, you can ask for ideas, though you may not get the most original answers from ChatGPT, but you can use them as a starting point for further exploration. You can also ask ChatGPT for help on planning your brainstorming sessions and the trigger questions that you will use, or ask it to remind you of other ideation techniques that you may not have in mind. In the prototyping phase, I think maybe depending on your context and industry, other AI tools might be more useful, such as Midjourney or GitHub Copilot, to present the design concepts in which you can get user feedback. But ChatGPT can be useful for planning the prototype testing, rehearsing user conversation, and analyzing the data or the results that you get. As I said earlier, with the future scenario tool, the Innovation Consultancy Board of Innovation actually created a toolkit for innovators powered by ChatGPT with interesting tools that you can check here on in this slide, and that can be used during research, ideation, or strategy planning. It is completely free and worth giving it a try to help you with your thought process. So these are some of the examples and recommendations for using AI. As we said, and we can see, it's a powerful tool, and its speed of development requires from us to catch up as soon as possible. But please remember that generative AI tools are helpers or co-pilots of your work, but you are the human with the deeper context knowledge of your business and the critical thinking and creative abilities to actually do the transformative work. Sometimes photographers have this saying that a good photographer is the photographer himself or herself and not the camera that they have. And I think in this case, it's probably the same. ChatGPT is a powerful tool, but it depends on our knowledge to make the most out of it. So now, well, I want to thank Philip for all the great information that you gave us. And I would like to open the question segment. So if anyone in the audience has a certain question that wants to ask Philip or me for that matter, you can send it in the chat.
Okay. I saw a lot of people clapping and being happy about this webinar. So that really pleases us. Roberto Dominguez asked us, I didn't understand the path of hallucinations. How do they happen? I suppose it's a question for Philip.
Well, and that's a very good question, because what you'll find is that many of the researchers involved in ChatGPT or Google Bard or any of these large language models will tell you they're not sure how they happen either, right? So, this model is built. It's a neural network model where, and then we have imagine a three-dimensional space. And imagine that we're going to put every word into this three-dimensional space. So we have arrows pointing in lots of different directions. Those are vectors, right? And imagine that when words are similar to each other, their vectors are close to each other, right? And if they're very different words, their vectors are far apart. They point in different directions. That's a pretty good analogy for what a large language model similarity comparison looks like. It's just in way more than 3 dimensions. So when we go to look for things that are similar in context to the question you typed in, it should be finding things in a neighborhood of concepts that make sense. And sometimes it just doesn't. And and again, researchers are not sure why this happens. It just ends up in the wrong neighborhood and starts giving answers that don't make any sense. So as you saw in my example, when I asked it one question about who the program lead for the data science PhD is, it found somebody who really does work here, but isn't the right answer. And there is no information it could have pulled from that would have said that that was the right answer. So why did it make up that answer? I don't know. At least when I asked it another question where it didn't know the answer, it said it didn't know. So why did it decide to make up an answer instead of saying it didn't know? I don't know. And that is, there are an awful lot of researchers trying to answer that very question now. It's why do hallucinations happen and how can we make them stop? It's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Merce Ortiz gave us a big shout out, and thank you, Harrisburg and buho, for this interesting conversation. Mauricio Suarez asks, how was the name of the tool that you mentioned for innovation? It is a free tool for access. Any particular web page different than ChatGPT that we can use? So I guess this question is more for Mariana. So Mariana.
Yeah, I just answered with the link to the toolkit, so you can all check it out. It is also free. As I said, it is done in collaboration with OpenAI, so it's trained with the same data set as ChatGPT, but it is focused on, or its purpose is to help innovation. So you can check out some really cool tools for user validation and brainstorming. So really explore and have fun with that tool so you can start using it in your meetings.
Thank you, Mariana. Marisela also asks, I don't know if it is kind of the same question. I want to learn more about GPT to improve the process. Please suggest me an URL or some other bibliography that can be useful. So I guess, Mariana, you already shared with us a couple of tools that can be used for that, but maybe if you can recall them again, please.
So I would also suggest Harvard Business Review has some really good blog posts or articles about improving processes, business processes with ChatGPT. Also check out, Board of Innovation also released a couple weeks ago a really great report on how generative or creative AI, as they call them, how these tools can help business processes, and it gives you some predictions and frameworks that you can check and see if it applies to your business sector. And it provides more tools that you can check out. So yeah, really dig in other sources of information and other tools. There are like massive I don't know if you have noticed, but on LinkedIn, every week people are sharing like, these are the new 50 AI tools that come out this week. So yeah, there's a lot of variety. It's important to notice that many of these tools are based in ChatGPT, but they can be fine-tuned for other purposes like innovation purposes. So definitely check out Harvard Business Review and the Board of Innovation page, because they also have like a spreadsheet with a lot of other tools that can be used in different processes, especially in innovation, but also in other business processes.
Thank you, Mariana. I guess this next question is for Philip. What are the main differences between ChatGPT 3.5 and 4.0? I guess you mentioned it earlier, but yes, go ahead.
So really the biggest difference is when ChatGPT 3.5 was trained, they train with different sets of parameters. They call them hyperparameters when we're talking about how the model is going to be built. They use a different set of hyperparameters, and you might have remember I mentioned like AutoGPT, which is able to adjust its own hyperparameters. The number of parameters they use, remember I said when we're talking about word similarity vector space, and I said, imagine it in 3 dimensions. Now imagine that when we are training this space, we train it in many dimensions. Some of my research, I work in things at the level of 300 and 500 dimensions. ChatGPT 3.5 was trained at millions of dimensions. So a huge and complicated vector model. ChatGPT 4.0, they went an order of magnitude higher. We're talking trillions of, actually several order of magnitude higher, trillions of hyperparameter dimensions. So we're making a model that has more links between things, more context built into it, and also more and more recent data. As at 3.5 stopped in September of 2021, 4.0 their data set is more recent, not completely current, but up until sometime last year in 2022. So we get more recent and better data, and we get a model with many, many more connections made in it. That's the biggest difference.
Thank you very much. And we have one last question. I guess it will be open for both of you. What are some examples of successful implementation of ChatGPT in different industries, and how has it positively impact business operations?
So I mentioned one. I'll mention this one, and then I'll ask Mariana to because I know she knows several, and that is MedGPT. So MedGPT is an implementation, obviously focused on medical care industry, and it acts as a personal assistant to researchers and physicians. And you know, we've had WebMD around for almost 20 years now, where you can go on a website and type in some symptoms, and it'll use a search engine to tell you what things are possibly wrong with you. And of course, you go in and you type in your headache and your fever, and it'll tell you you have brain cancer, because that's what WebMD does. But now we have this GPT trained model that can do a whole lot better than a search engine can, and is providing assistance. Now, we aren't going to depend on an AI to make diagnoses, but they can certainly look at all of the data surrounding a case and make recommendations to a physician for things to look at and tests to run, and really act as a force multiplier, something that can make the outcomes better by making physicians more aware of things that they should be paying attention to, maybe. So that's one pretty successful implementation that's pretty new, but is already making an impact in that industry. Mariana, I know you know a bunch more, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so as you said, in the medical sector, there's also some other uses that can be helped, or processes that can be helped with ChatGPT. For example, I was reading that in some hospitals, it can be used along with other tools like speech-to-text tools to summarize and write your medical records, for example, so that the doctor is not the one doing it, or the physician. And also in other, the customer service sector is one which will be benefited a lot from these tools, as the attention will be better, and also answering the questions or petitions of the customers, and also like the treatment that you get, because ChatGPT cannot get tired or be stressed, so it will always behave in a calm manner with your customers. Another example is here in Buho. We actually, as I said, use Jasper to help with our content creation. It really speeds up the process. As I said, there's a human part to this process. It's not like writing the prompt and then we publish the whatever blog post it replies. We add our style to this, and we double check its content, but it really speeds up the process. Just like yesterday, we had a new idea for a blog post, And Oscar, who is our external communications consultant, he said, okay, let me get back to you in a minute. And he then showed us the first draft, and it took a couple of minutes. So it is really great to see how our work can be more efficient and productive and happen in a more agile manner. Sometimes, like before ChatGPT, a new blog post would be or would have taken, I don't know, some weeks to develop the idea and then write the blog post. But now we can start with some basic drafts in a matter of a minute. And so in communications and marketing, the implementation is huge. And I have seen cases of other professionals that are using ChatGPT mostly individually in their work process as a replacement of Google or to make to summarize information or to analyze some of the data. For example, I used it to correct some of my grammar preparing for this presentation. So it is a really helpful tool for professionals, but we should aim to make this a more integrated tool in our business processes, following some of the tips that I shared with you today. So it can be really impactful in our businesses.
I have to admit that I also used it to help organize my speaker's notes for the presentation for today. So yes, ChatGPT helped with our presentation today.
Sure.
Okay, so we want to thank Mariana and Philip, and we want to thank you all for joining us today to discuss the power of artificial intelligence and its impact on businesses. As Mariana and Philip have already shared with us, there are a lot of opportunities to be explored and challenges to be faced when it comes to the integration of artificial intelligence into our business strategy. But it is true that by using data analytics and machine learning methodologies, business can find new opportunities to communicate their purpose better and to make informed decisions that will help them shine. So for buho and for HU Latin America, we are very committed to help organizations and professionals to achieve their goals by providing innovative solutions and guidance that reflect their values and beliefs. So we hope that today's sessions has been very informative and valuable to you as you navigate the ever-changing landscape of technology. I know that the HU Latin America team will send to all of the assistants of this webinar a survey to get some insight on our experience as general with this webinar. So just be patient and receive this survey. And once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and we're looking forward to see you again in our next webinar and the next space. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Philip. And thank you to everyone who stayed to this last minute of this conversation. And I hope you have a really nice Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.